Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for February 19th, 2021. I'm Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force. This meeting comes on the heels of our February 17th public hearing on our preliminary report. And the focus of this meeting is to talk about what we heard with respect to the feedback on that report on that night. So that'll be, I think, a big part of this meeting. Other things we'll do, just approve some minutes. There's an opportunity if there are, I know some subcommittees had an opportunity to meet this week. And so if there are any updates that you have based on those meetings that I suppose wouldn't be captured in the public hearing feedback portion, there's an opportunity for you to share that too. And then new business toward the end. Before we get started, any announcements or updates from any members of the task force? Okay, hearing none, we'll get to our first order of business, which is the question of approving the meeting minutes from Friday, February 12th, 2021. Those are the meetings from last week, and any edits or updates to those minutes. All right, let's have a vote then. We'll go right across my screen. All those in favor, and the first person actually is Mike.
I shouldn't vote because I was not present.
All right, that sounds like an abstention to me. Alexander?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Chi-Chi?
I guess I need to abstain too because I wasn't there.
All right. Malcolm?
Yes.
Eitan?
Yes.
Almas?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Kimberly? That was a yes?
Yes.
There you go. Bonnie? Yeah, I hear you now. Yep. Bonnie?
Yes.
And I'll say yes too. Look at the all pros at this point. This is great. Okay. And thank you, Devin, as always, for pulling those minutes together. They're really important. All right. So subcommittee updates, departmental analysis. Do we have any updates? Not sure that we do. Nope. Shaking of heads is fine. Okay, great. In that case, school resource officers, any updates from you all? Okay, good. Walk and talk. Shaking heads. Community engagement and visioning.
No updates.
No. I mean, I floated an idea to some folks, but I don't know if that's actually an update yet. So, yeah.
Okay. Will you talk to us about that later at some future point then? Maybe.
I certainly don't mind, but yeah, we have not really met about it. So, yeah.
All right, we'll hang tight then. Thank you. And vulnerable people and people in crisis.
We actually do have a quick update and a question. We were wondering, so we have two. First of all, we wanted to add a line to our report in response to a public comment saying that we should make sure to include peer support in Kahoot's crisis response teams if that's something that the town decides to set up. We're not sure how to make edits to the master preliminary report since that came to us as a PDF. And a second thing is whether we should continue subcommittee meetings after this week or whether any changes to the big report be discussed here in the all group meeting.
Well,
I'd just like to add to the first question. I did look up the person who wrote the email that Devin then sent on to us was the same person who asked the question in our public forum. So about, he was asking a question about professionalism. Are we just, don't replace just one professional system with another? Meaning he was concerned that we were going to go to a only licensed social workers, EMTs type of things being the first responders. And he wanted us to consider, you know, people with lived experience and stuff like that. So it's in our it's in our final report already in terms of his comment during the public forum. I guess what we were just wondering is, we agree that that's something we should consider, and should we append this in some way to the report, or shall we just think about this as we move forward? How do you want to handle it?
Yeah. Well, I think you certainly can. So if there's some place in the report that you have already where there's a natural fit to add that, if there's no objections from anyone on the task force to doing so, that's something that you can insert into the report still. And so that's why this, even at this point, the full the hearing that we had on Wednesday night was still on the preliminary report. There's still an opportunity this week to make adjustments as needed. So you can do that if you or alternatively, you can take the other route that you mentioned and sort of have that as part of the record. I would say if you think it's really important that be considered by whatever body is moving forward the work that you're proposing here, that you should put it in the report. That way it's unambiguous. And it seems like you can do that with a matter of a couple lines.
We did agree last night to do that, and we drafted a sentence that could be added. It's just not clear to us exactly the procedure, whether we should be emailing it to Devin, because it's no longer a Google Doc where I can just type it in.
Right.
This is Devin. That is an excellent question. And if subcommittee members would like to make changes to their reports, you can still do that in your Google Doc, because all of the, this is a rough draft. And for the second, we'll be formalizing all the fonts and, making transitions between sections. So your preliminary reports are still in your jurisdiction until we take that next step. So you can make those edits, and I think by next meeting is when things will sort of be cut off.
Yeah, and I would say, frankly, sooner than that. Our goal is to have finally adopted to adopt the final report next Friday, and immediately send that off to the select board once it's been voted on by this task force. Meaning, any edits at this point, I was going to sort of talk about that toward the end of this process, but I think we need those by the end of the weekend. I'd say, unless there's something really substantive that you want to radically change a recommendation that you haven't considered yet already, or something like that. We need those kinds of edits by the end of the weekend. I'm going to be working through the weekend to try to organize all of this to produce an executive summary or an introduction to the report, some of which you heard parts of, or the early stages of on Wednesday night in my introduction to all the different reports. So I want to be able to turn around the draft version of that by, I'd say, Tuesday at the latest for your comments on the final report that can get incorporated, and then have a final draft ready for you on Friday to vote on. Does that make sense? Okay. I forget the second point, Alex. I should have written it down.
The second question was just whether the subcommittees should keep meeting after this point.
I mean, I'd hold off right now. I think I'd hold off on that right now, unless you feel like there's some need to, but I don't see the need to do that right now from my perspective, but you may have a different perspective on that. Is that something you wanted to do, or just asking if something you needed to do? Just
asking if there's something that's not occurring to me, because from our perspective, when we were discussing it, we didn't see a lot of need for the subcommittee to keep meeting now that our report is together. And if there's any changes we want to make that are big as a task force, we can discuss them on Fridays.
I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Anybody think differently about that?
I think the other piece was the minutes, right? Like, obviously, like we met yesterday, and we have to approve our minutes. So we could just do that like next Friday or something, or, or because we met once yesterday and we have to approve the minutes and we can't approve them like on email or something. That,
Right.
I don't
Devin,
know.
is that something that that a subcommittee can do in these meetings? Is approve their prior minutes?
That's a good question. I don't see why not.
Yeah. I don't know. Haven't seen it happen, but I don't know why I couldn't.
I
The
move that
the
we
only-
approve the meeting minutes from last night's Vulnerable People and People in Crisis Subcommittee. Anyone
Seconded.
seconding?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Yes.
Right.
Well, I think
Or
I
shortly.
do think we have to notice it though. We have to include that on.
Yeah,
So-
that's the issue. It's not
Oh,
a
well.
notice meeting.
It was a
Right.
try.
Yeah, you give it a shot. I think we'll have to try that out for next week, but we'll look into that. Yeah. But it's good to hear everybody's in favor. Okay. Any other questions here, updates here? All right, Devin will add language so we can have the vote on the minutes for next week's agenda. If anybody else has that need also, please let Devin know, and that's a simple add to the agenda. We can take care of that then. Good. All right, so the only other thing, the big thing, frankly, that we need to do today is just talk about the public hearing from Wednesday night. I want to get your take on what it is that you heard, particularly anything that that you think we should be doing differently. Do we need to in any way change course or direction, or are there any meaningful edits that you think we need to make to the report based on the feedback that we received? All of those things. So I'm just going to go ahead and open the floor, and I think it'd be helpful to hear from as many of you as possible. I think everyone was at the public hearing, so I'd love to just hear your thoughts. Who'd like to go first?
All right, I'll jump in. First of all, I thought that the whole thing went very, very, very well. I thought the introduction that Raul put together was great, and everybody's summaries were very cogent. There was one comment that from one of my colleagues, actually, in Precinct 3, Jeff Benson. He said something that I think belongs in the summary, which is that things that like walk and talk and school resource officers that were put in place with good intent or by well-meaning people have turned into barriers. And that the fact that they are barriers now means that they need to be disassembled. It was a very thoughtful observation that he made. There's one other thing that I think somebody asked a question about, well, what's all this going to cost? In effect, that was their question. Just as a side note, it's worth mentioning that the town administrator, Mel Kleckner, gave a presentation to the advisory committee last night. I think he gave the same presentation to the select board on Tuesday. And he specifically mentioned that the concept of a social services department was on the table, and he specifically said, well, there's no money in this year's budget, which is certainly true, but that he recognized that it's going to be necessary to find the funds. And I think that is a pretty significant statement coming from the person who puts the budget together. That is a positive statement for the work of this committee. So there should be some reference to cost in that we do need to find the funds, that the cost will be not, in this range or something of that sort, because otherwise it's it's an obvious question. It's a question that's begging for an answer.
Yeah.
And those are my 2 comments.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I will follow up with Mel. He's made the commitment to work with others to price this out in advance of our presentation before the select board on the 2nd. As I mentioned on Wednesday night, it just wasn't something they could get done before the public hearing on the 17th. So we should have that. I understanding that our final report is supposed to be final next Friday, the 26th. I will reach out to him and just ask if we can just put a little urgency into that process. And I agree that it's important to at least put together some kind of estimate. And it's a reasonable question that I think select board members would ask when presented with this proposal. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Let's go next. Oh, and I can to the point about barriers, I can make sure to incorporate some of that into the intro based on Jeff Benson's comments. Yeah.
If I may, I thought Natalia Linos had many great comments, but one of them was that a police officer's position is a good job that's well paid. And I realize in this moment, while we think about how to pay for this stuff, this is not a great, it's going to be hard to think about these things, but her comment was, if we're moving positions, if we're moving work from the police department, someone in the social services department should be paid similarly, because people enter into that work because it's a secure job with benefits. So that's something to be considered when we're thinking about that.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in if
Kristen, yeah, please.
I come away with 3 things that were sticky for me on the other side of the public hearing. I think the first was the really effective framing that Bonnie did during the walk and talk presentation. I think the framing around if we're making public policy in an environment where we have disparate impact that's felt by a smaller group within the community, we need to come up with a way of thinking about how to make this policy in ways that don't perpetuate problematic systems. And I think that was a really important framing for us. It got introduced for walk and talk, but I think it's important for the entirety of the task force. So definitely appreciated her framing on that. The second was this theme that keeps coming up for us whenever we have discussions, which is around people versus systems. We got to this a lot with SRO, that the community feels appreciative of the effort that people are putting in, but the systems are problematic. And if we retain the focus or we recenter it back on the people who are doing the work, I don't think that's discharging our responsibilities for this task force. Our obligations are to look at the systems. And so I think that keeps coming up as a theme. I think it's particularly important that we continue to talk about the difference between the two. And then the third thing for me was related to the question that was asked at the end of the public hearing, but comes up all the time in both some of the Q&A and chat and just general discussion, which is the difference between the subcommittees, between reform and between reimagining. And the way that I think about my response to that is that one presumes the solution, the other does not. The reform committee, I think, presumes that policing as it exists is going to be part of the solution and we're trying to make adjustments to it. The other says we don't yet know the answer around what best confers public safety. And so our obligations are to try to figure out what the right answers are And if policing is part of that picture, then we will find a way to integrate it into the picture rather than starting with it as part of the solution and then trying to figure out how to make it more benign. So I appreciated the ask at the end, but I think it's among those things that we have to keep talking about as a task force, that we are trying to do more than presume the answers around public safety.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Amas?
I just had a question about something that I think Ryan Black brought up, which was, and he sort of said, how do we take into consideration the fact that we are surrounded by all these other communities? And I'm not sure have we done some, I don't even know how to answer that, or how do we, and unless I didn't understand the question, because I know that was something he was like, have you all taken into consideration the fact that we're all surrounded by these other communities, and how do we build that in? And again, I don't know there's an answer to that question, or whether we want to explore it somehow, or, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks, Almas. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting point too. And I have my own thoughts on it. One of the ways that we can actually get communities to neighboring communities to adopt different model is by showing leadership and adopting a different model ourselves. And so what I see so often is Brookline doing something, and then Cambridge, Somerville, Newton, even parts of Boston taking notice and be able to say, hey, look, Brookline was able to do it. We can pilot something or try something like this here. Or Cambridge doing something and the rest of us taking notice, or Somerville doing something and the rest of us taking notice. So, there are, I think this is an opportunity for us in the region to show that there can be a different way to think about this, and through meaningful process, we can actually change our entire orientation and approach to something like public safety in a way that I suspect others locally might decide to follow suit. And then you end up with more of a regional approach because we're learning from each other and then adapting based on what we see happening in other communities. So, proving this concept is going to be really important, not just for us, but for neighboring communities. But I'll think more about those comments and how we, through, there's a Metro Mayors group that sometimes comes together and works, takes positions together. But as often, I think that group, there are folks that just kind of go off on their own too, based on the needs of their own communities. But I think it was a good comment, and one I was thinking about after too. Yeah. Mike, did you want to respond on this?
Yeah, how about the Metropolitan MAPC, Metropolitan Area Planning Council?
Yeah, that's another, yeah.
Because the executive director there is a fairly forward-thinking guy, and Mark Drayson, and he, it might be worth sending him a copy of the report and asking him for his comments.
Yeah. Would you mind doing that, Mike? Do you know him?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'll write it down. Otherwise I won't.
Chi-Chi.
So I also had a response to that, or some thoughts on that. That comment really struck me because it was sort of the inverse of a bit what we've heard during our conversations, which is, even though Brookline has certain demographics or, certain statistics, we're surrounded by Boston, and that's what we have to keep in mind all the time in terms of, having certain numbers of police officers, or, looking at the traffic statistics. And we went to great lengths, and Raul, you went to great lengths to make sure that we looked at the traffic patterns and, in terms of where the entire region, and did a good analysis. And then Mike, you and I looked at surrounding communities for statistics too. So that kind of that did strike me. And I don't think we really made a lot of use of the work that you, Mike, and I did in terms of looking at other communities. But, you know, one of the things that did strike me in looking at the statistics is that there really is, you know, we really do have a lower crime rate in Brookline, and there really is no rhyme or reason for the staffing levels we're talking about, except that, you know, we can basically afford the number of police officers we have. You know, other communities with similar populations but lower median incomes have lower numbers of per capita police officers. So I think that analysis does cut both ways. And it was interesting that it was brought up. The other comment I just wanted to make about yesterday's hearing was, you know, obviously folks were incredibly supportive, and, you know, a lot of folks said thank you, and that was gratifying. I'm just wondering though, if, you know, we're preaching to the choir there, and we haven't heard comments from the folks that are much more skeptical.
Thanks, Chichi. I have, after we hear from everybody, I have another question that I think touches upon that that last piece there. Anne?
8 in the morning to 9 in the morning, my brain is a little foggy. It's just the way it is. I just want to say that what Chichi just said, I wonder about that too, in terms of we're hearing all this really positive feedback, and I'm wondering where the people with different opinions are. I was surprised not to hear any concerns in the public forum. I also just want to reiterate what Kristen said. You said it way more eloquently than I can, especially at 8 in the morning, in terms of the differences between the Reform Committee and the work that we're doing. I think is a really important underlying theme of all of our work, and something to just note going forward. That's it.
Thank you. Eitan, were you raising your hand?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what everyone said. Generally, I thought it was great presentation. I continue to think that the school resource officer component of this is just very, very strong, especially strong and compelling. And so I think that we should continue to make sure we discuss that in a prominent position in the presentation. I wanted to double check that my offer to present the survey data to the police union was received by the police union. I want to make sure that it's noted that this offer has been made. I have not gotten any follow-ups about it, but I just don't want it to go without notice that, you know, we reached out and offered that. And if they don't want to have a presentation, that's okay. But I just want to make sure it's noted. And do we have any update about that, Raul?
No, we did reach out over email, right? I'm looking right now just to confirm that. But no response, I don't think.
Okay, I didn't reach out. So I mean, you reached out?
Yeah, I'm just checking to confirm that. Well, let me look into that and make sure. But I did talk live with Michael Keaveney in person about that, and he was open to it. I just have to check and see what the last correspondence we had was, but I'll look into that after.
Right. And look, if they don't want to do it, that's fine. But I want to be able to make sure that we can go to the select board and say we reached out and made this offer and wanted to share information. And, you know, if they don't want it, they don't want it. The second thing I'll say, or the third thing I'll say, is that I was interested in the number of people who were there. I actually think it was relatively small compared to what I was expecting. I think I'm really proud of the report that we have, and I just want more of the community to see it and know about it. And I think that I guess my intuition is that between now and the next one, we really need to do more outreach. Not to say that everyone we do outreach to is going to love it, but I think that you know, given the amount of energy that we saw in protests this summer in the community on these issues, it seems like more people want to know about this and need to know about it.
Let's go with Bonnie.
Building on that thought, I think, yeah, we should absolutely, it's creepy how little criticism we are getting actually. And I think we maybe between now and the end of this weekend should, I mean, I don't know what's realistic about that, but we should send it to people we know are not going to like it so that we can have a little bit of preparation for those counter arguments or those criticisms. Because we have none right now, and that's weird. And you know it's going to come. So, I mean, yeah, it might make sense for at least a little bit to send it to someone or groups of people that we might think are going to be critical, or even a clip of our presentation.
Yeah.
Because getting the whole thing read is probably unrealistic.
I imagine there's some folks that are keeping their powder dry and waiting for the public hearing at the select board meeting.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that in addition to all the other outreach that was done, all 240 town meeting members, which represent 15 members per precinct across 16 precincts in Brookline, elected representatives were all sent the information about the public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And they will all also be sent the information about the next steps, the next public hearing as well. So the information certainly has been out there.
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe individual, I don't know, something.
Mike?
Yeah, with regard to, it's an interesting question Bonnie's asking. With regard to the offer to the union, I think it's important to put that in and to do it from the perspective of, well, we offered and they didn't come is a mistake. It'd be much better to say we offer and we hope that one of the following steps will be an opportunity to discuss this with the police officers. It's really, it's let's open the door with whatever comments we make about that, rather than using it as a well, we told you so.
Yeah, I don't think that's at all. And maybe that's not what Eitan was suggesting anyway. But I don't think.
But I'm thinking about, you can write things in a neutral way, you can write things in a positive way or a negative way, and I like to lean in the positive, in the invitation direction.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think. I think of this as, Anyway, I don't know that this aspect of it needs to be part of our report necessarily. I mean, I think that we should continue our outreach and that's important. But that was going to be a meeting anyway that we had agreed would not be a public meeting. And I think then having a meeting that isn't a public meeting in that way, and then I just don't know that it would be appropriate to share out from that meeting. I think that the point was to engage in dialogue and that has some value to it. But I wouldn't want to then later on, I think folks going into that meeting from the police department, understanding that's a private meeting, I think we're going to get a lot better feedback than if folks know that something said in that meeting, we're going to share it later. That something that might
right. That's not what I was implying at all. I
Okay.
recognize it.
All right. Yeah. All right. We'll talk more about this. I'll Eitan, let's you and I talk offline and just check on that. Almas?
Just coming back to the, the differences between the reform committee and our task force, and also the fact that we haven't received, a lot of criticism. I'm just coming back to the subcommittee that they have on mental health, and the reform committee has that, sort of same committee, and the differences, because I know Anne and I had asked for their report and we reviewed it. And I don't know, Anne, if you sent feedback or not, because I know Elizabeth had said send us feedback, but we can talk offline about that. But it was different. And so like, it'll be curious to see if we get any feedback from that committee, about our report, because, well, we haven't sent it to them anyway, but we may want to think about that, just because they sent us their report, and I know we had wanted to give feedback on that, and they do have their public hearing next Wednesday, I believe, right? So just I know this just throwing that out, like it's so different from ours, and then what happens, like my thing, maybe you'll talk about this, Raul, at some point, but like what happens later, like what they do and what we do, and how does it all mesh together, and then like what comes out of the mix, like I have no idea like what's going to happen next, so that's
I just like to briefly respond to, I asked for them to share the report because it wasn't on Google Docs, and they were discussing the report and we didn't have access to it. So now it is on Google Docs. So we were able to read it, and our report is certainly on Google Docs, and they are absolutely more than welcome to read it and share their comments. Aside from that, I just think, as Kristen said earlier, our perspectives going into our work and writing our reports are extremely different. And, obviously comments and feedback are always welcome, but I just think they're very different types of recommendations. And
No. Okay, we'll talk more about next steps before the meeting's over. Yeah, Kristen.
I share some of what Bonnie mentioned, in that it does feel a little bit creepy that there were not more challenges to the substance of our report. To some degree, I feel like if your detractors don't show up at the place where you're doing your advocacy, then the battle may be elsewhere. And so that's just one thing I'm keeping in mind. But ultimately, there is a pretty wide swath of stuff in the report, some of which the specific recommendations that we have for SROs, for example, I'm wondering if maybe doesn't sink in for folks. We're making the recommendation that you not begin the school year with SROs in place, and the degree to which something like the specificity of that recommendation maybe is not sinking in for folks, that we're saying, don't get started with this unless you have the public vetting and the public accounting. And if the specificity of that ask just may not be clear, but it strikes me that something as concrete as that recommendation not to have people challenging it seems off, because it seems like it'll end up narrowing some window of time where we're going to have to figure this out to like a week to 2 week process, rather than trying to figure it out like right now, because that's what we're asking to be done.
Right. Well, Michael.
Yeah, I just had a thought, and I don't know, maybe this is just to ensure awareness from everyone, both sides of the aisle, if you will, that maybe putting together like a summary of just the recommendations, a 2 to 3 page summary by subcommittee that just contains the recommendations and contains the recommendations with the specificity that Kristen just sort of mentioned, that would perhaps put on notice everybody, and so that it's not the multiple page, I don't know how many pages it ended up being, but I imagine it's at least 50 pages or so, the full report. And maybe that sort of gives everyone a cliff notes of what the recommendations are.
Right. Thanks, Michael. Anne?
So one of the things that I've been looking at, because it ties into hiring and our employees, is have you and the reform group looked at the recommendations as they come out, and how that matches with the police reform legislation that was just passed at the state level, and how that pairs with it, or does it do something different? So that's just a thought for both, this committee and this task force and the committee as well, to say, okay, here are our recommendations. Is there something that is being covered by the reform legislation, or is there something different that we need to look at as well? So just that thought as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. One of the questions I had written down here, understanding that we haven't, that was technically public hearing number 7, but over the last few weeks, since we've had recommendations, we've had 6 public hearings, including the one that we had this week. I would like to know, what are the questions that we think we need to answer? We heard one of them earlier. One of those questions is around, all right, what's this going to cost? Even if I'm on board, I still want to know what's the budget impact going to be to the things that you're recommending. It's a fair question. How this interacts with the new state legislation is one I just heard from Anne. I wonder if there are any other questions you think that we need to address either in the report or through our next presentation. Yeah, Malcolm.
Yeah. So I want to reiterate, a lot was said in terms of like a lack of public critique, and just my experience in Brookline is that is coming just as the storm is coming, right? Like it's coming. I think one of the things that we have to say in our reimagining is that not that we will stay safe, because I think most people believe we're already safe, that this will make more of Brookline citizenry feel safe. That what we're saying in this reimagining is actually asking for all of our citizens to feel closer to feeling safe all the time. And that this is my belief, that reforming the existing system does not do that. It does not increase the overall safety of all of Brookline citizens. And so I think because what we're saying will feel like it is the more radical, we also have to prove that that radical actually increases safety. So, I think about it with the SRO. One of the things we tried to point out in that argument was that actually adding an SRO does not increase safety in our schools. It does not actually do that. Whereas we know kids who are struggling and things like that, it's amazing on a school break getting some time to think, like, how many kids that I work with are hurting in real ways that don't need a police officer. They need more support services. And so, and that will actually keep them safe from self-harm, safe from harming other children, safe from harming other, I deal with high school kids. Some of these kids are bigger than I am, safe from harming the adults in there. And so I think that has to be a real point of emphasis, I guess, that we are actually trying to increase safety, not trying to limit safety. Because I think, the go-to is, and we've heard where people say, oh, you're trying to defund the police, you're trying to do this. That's going to decrease my safety, is that argument. And what we need to do is push forth that is not actually what we're trying to do. And we actually have evidence that what we're asking for increases safety. And so I think, I think that's kind of where I'm at, and where I particularly left the public hearing.
Yeah, I think there was something earlier on. I don't know, maybe Eitan's can talk about this, but earlier on in our meetings when we talked about this, and in particular the total lack of correlation between spending on policing or the size of a police force and the safety of a community, that there is no correlation between the two. So I think we need to somehow bring that back into this conversation, because I remember it's something that we talked about pretty early on, and there's a lot of studies to this effect too. So I think bringing that into this is going to be important, because I think people do think the police keep us safe, when in reality there are a number of factors that lead to Brookline being a safe community, external to policing.
Tisha made that. Actually, she's about to make the same point, so I'll stop and let her make it.
Oh, I was actually going to make a different point, but I was going to respond to Malcolm, and you know, that's a brilliant point, Malcolm, and we should definitely emphasize that. And you know, I was thinking about how the work of the Vulnerable Populations Subcommittee does that as well. That we should really emphasize that this will mean that the residents are safer and better served when they're dealing with mental health and substance abuse and lack of housing. And, you know, it just triggered the story that a friend of mine told me. Her mom had dementia and would do things like, if they were out of milk and she was at work, she would call the police because they were out of milk. And, you know, just thinking, number one, what a, you know, waste of resources. Number two, you know, someone with a social, you know, mental health, social services background could help so much more. Number three, that was a setup for potential conflict with the police. And so, you know, I think we can really make the case, and just to, you know, my original point was going to be that I know I'm probably one of the first people to bring up, we didn't get a lot of pushback at the hearing, but, you know, the thing to remember is we've done a lot of great work, all of the subcommittees, in research and putting together our findings and our recommendations. And we have a lot to back up these recommendations. And I think, you know, any pushback, we really have a lot to respond to back up the recommendation. So, you know, just to put a positive spin on, you know, it's not that we just made some recommendations out of the blue. There was a ton of work that went into backing these up.
Eitan?
Yeah, I want to, Malcolm's made me think of a budget comment, because I'm thinking about people who, they're mainly seeing this through a lens not of racial equality or of safety, but of budget. And I think we should have a section that addresses the costs of inaction. We, of course, have a record of costs spent from the town in response to discrimination cases, but we've also created now a very clear paper trail paid for by the town of widespread perceptions of discrimination. And in the case of traffic, evidence of consistent with discrimination. And so, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I do appear in court cases a lot as an expert witness. And, you know, find me a plaintiff that's not going to look at this data and say this town is engaging in discriminatory behavior, and the cost of inaction is real. And so I again, I know we have lawyers on this call, so I'm not the right person to draft that language, but I do think it makes sense, particularly for people who are single-mindedly focused on budget, to think about not just the costs of change, but the costs of not change.
Okay. Got it.
And not only from a legal perspective, but from a quality of life, human perspective. What are the costs involved with not doing these recommendations for the people who live and work and visit our community? So not only is there a litigious angle, but how are we supporting our community is part of that cost equation, I think.
Other things that we should be thinking about, questions that are likely to be asked that we should have an answer for, anything like that? Um, I wanted to get back to something that Michael had mentioned about a summary of the recommendations. You know what, I'm going to try to think through what this looks like in the report. Uh, you know, I have seen reports where, you know, you get your executive summary and it goes right into the recommendations, and then you see sort of all the work that went into to creating those recommendations. I think, and I've been thinking about, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Certainly that's the easiest way to get to, if you just want to get to the bottom line, what does this group want to do? That's certainly the easiest way to get to it. You know, one of the things that I've been concerned about with reports like this is whether or not people are reading the whole thing or going to read the whole thing, or just to take the top lines. But we saw like one article that came out already, they're just going to say, you know, this group decides they want to do this, and not actually reference any of the rationale or the reasons why the group wants to do this. And so I'm just thinking that through. I would not want to release just a list of recommendations. That I think is asking, you know, I don't know, that I want to release a report. I guess the question is, you know, just thinking about maybe moving, and I've got to take a look at all the subcommittee reports, because the way that you wrote the recommendations are different based on each subcommittee. Like, you know, some of them are like, here's a line and this is the recommendation, and others are, there's obviously a lot more context to it because it's necessary. So I've got to think about what that looks like to put the recommendations somewhere toward the top, or whether or not there's something like a narrative description of the recommendations that sort of directs people down in the report to exactly where they can find the information that leads to those recommendations. I'm just not sure if there's any thoughts you have on that. I'd love to hear them.
Well, I wonder, you know how documents, you know, in school, no one wants to read everything, so you just start by reading the abstract. So I wonder if you started out with the recommendations there, and then people can go and read it, because no one's going to read 148 pages. They're just not. I don't think that even the people who are not for us is not going to read 148 pages. I didn't say anything before, but I wanted to just chime in. You know, I voted no for the survey all the way to the end, and even though the survey didn't turn out the way I felt like it should, or it didn't get to the people that I felt needed to see it. I'm glad that we did it, because I heard people talk about like, oh, I saw you had data. I'm so glad. So I know that people want to see data. So Eitan, you know, I appreciate that, you know, the whole task force that you pushed through and did that. Also, I was just thinking about, no one's there saying, oh, there was no backlash. And so my thoughts were that these people are sitting in the back waiting to, come in for the kill. But with all the report, all the data there, it doesn't matter if they come in for the kill, because you have everything in black and white for them to see. So I'm not concerned at all about what people have to say. You see it. So if Brookline doesn't want to make changes, it means Brookline just doesn't care.
Thanks, Kimberly. And I agree with you. I think most people in the public aren't going to read every word. I would be extremely disappointed, though, to find out that a select board member or a town meeting member or someone else who is responsible for voting on any of this wouldn't read every word, though. And so that will be my expectation. And any as a select board member, I plan on reading every word of the reform committee's presentation, and I mean, how could you make decisions without doing that? That would be disappointing and embarrassing if that was taking place. So I think it's still important that all that's in there, because there are folks that ultimately, after hearing from the public about what they think, are going to need to actually vote on these things. So that's part of our responsibility. Yeah.
We produce between the select board and the advisory committee produces something like a 300-page set of combined reports for town meeting. And we were the advisory committee meeting last night. We were joking that those used to be bound like a book, you know, and you would sit in town meeting and hear the cracking of the binding when town meeting members opened it, because they were opening it for the first time when they got to town meeting. And that's still true, even though it's no longer there in the book.
Right.
I think an executive summary with the recommendations and pointing to the rationale is so important, because there are 240 town meeting members, Raul, as correct as you are, that they damn well ought to be reading both of these reports. They aren't going to.
Right.
And so
And I agree
the summary is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense for town meeting members, not for select board members. They don't get off that easy. But no, there will be an abstract, there will be an executive summary, narrative, or some form of the recommendations at the top line. You know, a good recommendation from Ann Braga. She sent to us about hyperlinking to the main report section. I'd like to see how that can happen, so that people that want to say, how'd you reach this conclusion, can literally just click directly to the section that tells them, that gives them the answer to that. So we'll try to make it as easy to read as possible. Alexander?
Earl, I agree with what you're saying about being very concerned that people are not going to do the reading. And I think that's even partly what we saw. I was a little bit concerned to see this in some of the public hearing on Wednesday that was mostly full of folks who supported us. I think there was at least some indication in some of the comments that we were hearing that folks hadn't fully read the reports that they were commenting on, that they were saying, well, why don't you consider this and that and the other things that are in the report? And so I agree with you about an executive summary, that I think that there's a real danger to that. For me personally, I'm not as busy as a town meeting member, but I am a grad student. And when I have the opportunity to read an executive summary instead of an enormous paper, I do it. One thing that I think could be really helpful is that currently you open up our report and you go 150 pages. Oh my God. A lot of those page numbers are appendices.
Right.
I wonder if we might create an additional version of our report that is the reports only without appendices, and present them both so that people have access to both, but so that people don't open it up and immediately take a backflip. I know that the Vulnerable People Subcommittee report is 35 pages. Our report is not 35 pages. We have a lot of appendices. Right. And I wonder if that might help encourage folks to read more thoroughly.
Okay. Yeah, sort of a short and a long report.
Yeah, essentially. And just, have both links presented side by side. Hey, if you want to see the appendices, here they are. Otherwise, here's the concise version. We're not actually cutting anything out.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, from the text of the reports themselves.
Right.
Or just hyperlink the appendices. Maybe.
Okay.
Or combine all the reports and just put all of the appendices at the end.
Well, so to me, the thing that I'm specifically thinking about isn't so much like the appendices appearing intermittently throughout the report, but the fact of when you open it and see 150 pages, I think that's a turnoff to folks.
Right. So hyperlink maybe.
All right, we'll figure that out. I think we can find a solution to that. Other thoughts? Look, I haven't got a chance to offer my thoughts on Wednesday night. I thought that the presentations that you all made were fantastic, went exceedingly well. You were direct to the point. We got it all done basically at an hour. And so I don't know that we can do it much quicker than that, with 5 subcommittees and a survey to talk about, as well as a proposal for a new agency. And of course, the lead-in that's necessary to sort of set the stage for folks that are, the way that I wrote the lead-in was presuming, and I think correctly, that there are some folks that were tuning in for the very first time. I think that is going to be doubly true on March 2nd when we present our findings to the select board, is that there are going to be a lot of people that are tuning in for the very first time, haven't been to any of our meetings, don't know what we've been doing, haven't read about it or anything, and are hearing it for the first time. So you can expect that we're going to need to sort of do what we did and sort of introduce all of it. Why are we here? What's the purpose of this? Because I think that is also elemental to understanding ultimately the recommendations that we came to. So are there any other thoughts about the presentation or anything that you think can be improved with our presentation? I'm going to take a look through all of it, and I may or may not send notes to folks who presented, but it was pretty solid. Folks were very well prepared. I would say if you feel like you need to jot down more notes or have more of a script prepared or something like that, that's up to you. But I think the points that were in there, I thought were the points that needed to be made. I'm just curious to hear if anybody else has thoughts on the presentation, anything we should be doing to make that more clear or impactful or anything else. Yep, Chichi.
I was just thinking that, at least for the portion I did, I probably violated some of the good rules of PowerPoint presentations by having only text and reading from the PowerPoint. So I'm just thinking, maybe jazzing that up, trying to see if I can drop like the map that Todd Corain gave us or some of the charts in there.
Yeah, you know what? That is a good point. I think yes, those two things are the things that I thought about. Now that you remind me, is one, that map that really does show the traffic flow through the community, and then I don't know if it's the speeding data or something else like that really highlights the sort of the disparities that we've been talking about. I think that would be great. Yeah. Any other suggestions? Okay. Good. I would say, Eitan, the survey presentation moved pretty quickly, and I know that's because we limited your time. I think if we added 3 minutes or so for people to be able to slow it down just by I don't know, some order of magnitude, so that people can see the slide a little bit longer. Also understanding that there are people that will be watching the presentation that haven't read the report. So they're seeing some of these people are seeing these numbers for the first time. And so you're sort of walking them through it, but allowing their mind to sort of catch up, because there were some slides that went through, I think, fairly quickly. And so I think you can feel free to give yourself a little bit more, I don't know, lower the speed by a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right, so what I will do is I'm going to take all these comments into consideration. I'm going to put together this weekend an executive summary for your consideration, and that we will get early next week up available through a Google Doc for you all to comment on and for the public to see. It'll be in our folder. And so you can sort of make any comments you want there, or I guess send in comments or whatever we do. and then turn around. Geez, I'm gonna need a quick turnaround on that. So I'll promise to have something ready for you all by Monday, and I think we're gonna need a turnaround on any of your comments within about, I don't know, 24, 36 hours or so. So if you can just keep some time in your schedule to take a look at that and turn it around, because then I need to incorporate those comments into a final draft that we can have ready by Friday. I'm not expecting to create any new direction or anything that isn't already in your subcommittee reports, or that we haven't talked about here, or that isn't part of your recommendations. The goal is to best capture the conversations we've had in these meetings and what is to come in the rest of the presentation. So you shouldn't expect me to, I'm not creating policy in the executive summary. That won't be happening. Malcolm, do you have some? Oh, no, okay. So I'll do that, and I've got all your comments here, and try to incorporate this as much as possible, and then we'll figure out how to do. I think the hyperlinking is going to be the best way. Is to say, like, essentially, this is the, if you don't read anything else, read these. I don't know, 5 to 7 pages or whatever it is. I don't know what number of pages it's going to be, but read these pages. But this connects you to all of the work that's been done, all of the history, the historical information, and I'll find some way during that opening to implore people to keep reading, even after they've seen what it is that we're recommending, to keep reading, so that they have the full weight of the report. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that that this is a report people are going to read 20 years from now. I hope. some student's going to write a report on it 20 years from now, maybe. But I've been thinking about that and making sure that if there's something we want to say, we need to put it in the report, because folks won't necessarily, go back and watch the hearings and stuff like that, although they may. But if there's something really important that we think we want to say or that we want to cover, it needs to be in the document, so that people who are looking at this, later on, maybe it's not 20 years, maybe it's a year from now, and some other community is thinking about engaging in the same process, that it's as clear as possible, why this group was created, how we came together, what our process was, and why we reached the recommendations we did. I think so. As you look at sort of the final version with new eyes, I would encourage you to see whether or not, and to make comments, reflective of that. The fact that this is going to be a document that may be looked at by folks not here or here well into the future. Bonnie. Oh,
Sorry,
Bonnie. Yeah. Sorry.
This might be too close to our slides and key findings, but maybe it makes sense at the beginning of each individual subcommittee report to have an equation, residents of BHA feel this way, Black and Brown residents that we spoke to feel this way, public safety, it doesn't equal public safety, or something like that, like a real distilled version of the findings which equal the recommendations. Maybe that's, I don't know, not exactly it, but I'm just trying to think of a way to, in the document, highlight the super important stuff, because then if you're looking at the highlights of the report that are in the report, you might continue reading down a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe that's, I don't know if that's something or not, but I just like, because I know the walk and talk report can be distilled to equations. Does it answer this question? This is our central question. These were the answers we found, and these are our conclusions. I don't know. Maybe that's completely obvious, but.
All right. Thank you. Malcolm?
Yeah, Mike, were you about to say something? I couldn't tell. But, okay. particularly with what Raul was just saying, and the Reimagine committee has seen. So I said, really late in this game, I came to some conclusions through, in particular, the challenge whether we should refer to these as the police department, and to perhaps just refer to it as Brookline Public Safety. And I also started to think about other titles and other things that went along with that don't necessarily match our town structure of our town's organizational structure. And so in this late hour, I am challenging, I'm in the midst of challenging that, and want to, kind of think about like that. The military grade rankings, I think, need to go. I think those send a real distinct message. And I think uniforming does as well. I mean, uniforms do a lot of things that could be positive in terms of like unity, as well as a piece of identity. But they could also work in other ways, in forms of intimidation, perpetuating fear, and using those things to maintain social order as opposed to public safety. And so, what Raul said hits a lot, because particularly in my job and my work, that happens a lot. You write something in the moment and people don't quite grasp it or get it, and then they loop back later. Just an example, James Baldwin wrote an essay in 1963 about teaching kids the important things as they're happening in 1963, as Medgar Evers was killed, as JFK was killed. So all those other things. That just resurfaced from an NPR article, not that long ago. And so, what Raul said really resonates with me, that, if we're really reimagining, here's our chance. And we should put it out. We should put it out in the moment and challenge and everything else. But another reality is that, there will be those people who come back a year later, or 10 years later, or 20 years later, and say, oh, wow, this isn't actually a new idea. This is something that was put forth in a very official way in March of 2021.
Yeah. Thanks. Chichi?
Did Mike have a comment?
Oh, Mike, do you want to jump in? You good? Okay.
Okay, well, I was just going to respond to Bonnie's suggestion, but after Malcolm's very profound remarks, I feel they're very small. What Bonnie said made me think, for the executive summary, what she said about that equation, or, something from each subcommittee really distilling what they had to say, maybe it should be up to the subcommittees to draft something like, just here are our findings, and, like for the PowerPoint slide, in a very short distilled bullet, and then right underneath the recommendation, because, it kind of flows like that. If you find, that Black motorists are stopped more often, recommendation, move some function to civilians. And that way, that might take some of the load off of you, Raul. That's just a thought. I mean, maybe the rest of the subcommittees will now hate me for saying that, but I was just thinking, if, what Bonnie suggested, if we all did it, it would actually might be something that would work for the executive summary.
Yeah. Can you tease that out a little bit more on what that might look like? So you're saying a couple lines that lead into each recommendation?
Yeah, and the couple lines would be the findings, or, the way Bonnie had framed it for the walk and talk was an equation, and maybe that's the best way of distilling it for their portion of the report, or for their subcommittee report. But so that the recommendations aren't lacking context, you have the finding right above it, and maybe in the finding you have hyperlinks, so that, if I'm saying Black motorists are more likely to be stopped, not only in their proportion to the Brookline population, but surrounding communities. Brookline population, you have the Brookline data, you have the traffic map hyperlink somewhere in that too. And then right underneath, you have the recommendation. Recommend, asking the state legislature to move to allow us to move some of the traffic functions to civilians.
Right.
And I'm saying, I'm pitching, or asking if the subcommittees would be able to do that, because we're, closer to it and it would save you some work, but I don't know, that people might be like, please don't do that.
That would save me a lot of work. There's no question about that, Mike.
Yeah, can I just, if we're gonna do that, it's really important to have a template that
Right.
all of the subcommittees follow, because otherwise it's going to be confusing to people. It'd be much easier to follow if there's a template. So it's easy for me to say, and I'm not sure it's so easy to produce a template, but some kind of guidance would be really very helpful if we're going to try that.
I mean, the timing might not work if you're trying to get this done over the weekend. That would mean folks would have to do it like today or early tomorrow. So, I don't know if there's
We get
bandwidth
paid
for
overtime on the weekends, don't we?
that. That's right. We get time and a half on our luxurious salaries.
Bonnie, what do you think? You're muted.
So this is not exactly on that topic, but I think something that's a really good point to make in my research that I've been doing with all this stuff is that absolutely none of our points are new. This was brought to the front of my brain by Malcolm's comments about history floating back up to the surface. And I can't, for the life of me right in this moment, find the name of the commission in the 60s or 70s. But so like in the Nixon administration, beginning, what's that?
Kerner?
The current commission.
Yes. So Nixon, in the beginning of the war on drugs, was told to decriminalize marijuana, but instead he put it into the highest level of criminalization of drugs. And so that had a repercussion. The Kerner Commission found that we should be providing people with social services instead of criminalizing all of these things. Like everything that we have found has been found before, every single bit of it. So I think it's important to say that we are not inventing a wheel here. We are just reinforcing the historical ideas that have come before us, even by white people. The Kerner Commission were not activists. In fact, there's a lot of problems with that commission, with that report. But I think that's a significant thing to consider. We have substantiated, reports all the way back, like decades, for this information to stand on. Just the thought.
Well, let me do this because I think there's a way to do what Chi-Chi's suggesting, but in a different way. I'm happy to work to put together the list of recommendations that appear before the subcommittee reports, to pull those from the subcommittees and to include a small some small descriptor with the recommendation that that then again links to the subcommittee report. And what I want to make sure is that you all, when it gets to you, and I'll get that as quickly as possible to you, that you all take a look at those and make sure that it properly captures the work that you did, or the rationale for those for those recommendations, and to then make any edits that are necessary to that. And that way it's all done. That way the formatting is all set. They're all going to be about, the same length. It's readable. There's not one that's, just one line and one that's, 3 paragraphs long, that kind of thing. But it'll be up to you to sort of verify that gets at what it is that you were recommending and why. Does that make sense? All right. What do I got to do, right? I'm around. Get it done. Be fine. I may be able to turn this around even quicker. At least maybe I might actually, at the onset, what I might do is focus my efforts on that piece and then get that to you as quickly as possible. That way you have more time to make any necessary edits on that. We'll see. But I'll be on this. We'll get it done. Any other thoughts or anything else, I guess, on any of this that you want to see incorporated? We can talk more about our presentation to the select board next Friday. So we'll talk more about that then. Anything else here? Good. Y'all done great work. Let me tell you. This is why I'm so adamant about people reading the damn report, is because like that's where the juice is. You know what I mean? Like that's where the good stuff is, because it's the historical information that you've uncovered matters, the conversations that you've had with people that matters, like all of it. It's not just the recommendation that matters, like the process matters. And so we'll do our best in our communications going forward with people as we invite them to the public hearing and stuff like that, as we release the report, to encourage people to read the full report. Grab a cup of coffee. Heck, if you can read Stamped from the beginning, you can read the report of the task force to reimagine policing in Brookline. All right. So that thing is.
Nobody read that. No, everyone's lying.
Excuse me, I did.
No. Some people read it, but whoever's reading it is not the one that we need to read this report, is what I'm saying.
So we'll do that. All right, y'all. Well, this is good. All right. So next steps, just to clarify, this weekend, I will. What we're going to do is we're going to take this document that we have all the different reports. We'll use the Google Docs that are already existing to create something. I think what I want to do is I want to take all the appendices and put them in one block, right? So I think Alexander was alluding to this, because the appendices also impact the readability, right? So I've read the subcommittee report, and then it's got like 20 pages of appendices before I can get to the next subcommittee report, right? So I think we're going to find a way to put those all. We may need to do some renumbering or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but to put those all in one place that's well organized. It's all going to be, there's going to be a table of contents too, so people should be able to find all this stuff. All right. Anyway, don't worry about that part. But I get the point that we need to make this as readable as possible for people, because if it's like that long email, that when someone writes you a really long email, it's like the last one you respond to, because like I can't be bothered with that, right? So we want people to be able to pick this up and actually start going. I get it, and we'll make sure that that the formatting of the report lends itself to people like picking it up and reading through it. So all that will happen as quickly as possible. You'll hear from Devin or myself. And I say myself because I know the weekend's coming and we ask so much of Devin, but for you to give feedback on this, we'll give you a deadline on that, but I encourage you to, if you can do it as quickly as possible, it'd be really helpful to be able to produce a final report in time for Friday for us to vote on. That's it. Anything else there? Hearing none. Anything for new business that we need to cover? Okay. Yeah, last thing else. Oh, good, Malcolm.
I was just going to say, Donnell has some questions in the Q&A.
Oh, yes. What do we have here?
Marty Rosenthal has what looks like a comment to me as opposed to a question.
Okay, let me look at the question from Donnell first. So we can get data on the number of POC stops and arrests over the last 10 years. I asked because it has to do with impact fee money. Is there data on BPD detail abuse? Can we ask HR how many minority BPD officers have been promoted in the last 10 years? who in the BPD conducts the interviews. Lastly, BPD firearms training for Brookline residents, especially the minority residents in town. Thank you for your time. These are all great questions. They're not within the scope of the work of this task force. It's, as I mentioned on Wednesday night, these are questions, the answers to which I have great interest in as a board member. I think these questions are more appropriate, frankly, for the Reform Committee to look into. And so I'd encourage you to share those questions with them. And I look forward to hearing the answers myself. Oh man, can I even read this? Somebody want to summarize? This is really difficult to read. I'll just be honest with you. Maybe I'll just give it a shot and just read it, and we'll have it in the public record. As Chi-Chi respectfully put it, skeptic, I'm not even slightly that of all your apparent great motives, reimagining and hard work, awesome, but of most of your overall objectivity, yes, a dubious term, logic and openness to really listen and take even a speck seriously, us, a very disparate group. I like, you know what, Marty, do you want to share your thoughts with us? I'd be happy to take a minute and just hear from you directly. It's just really difficult to understand what you're saying there. And so, Marty, you're here. Can we, Devin, would you mind promoting Marty if he's willing to share? Because we do want to hear from folks that have different thoughts about the work that we're doing. So go for it, Marty.
Well, actually, I can summarize it pretty simply. I just don't think you folks are very open-minded. And that's why I would not share my comments to the public hearing. That's the short version of I'm the exemplar of what Raul was talking about 2 long emails. So I had to consolidate a little because there's apparently a character limit. And so then I cut out some things like commas and so forth. Anyway, sorry about the length, and sorry to those that don't want to hear from that point of view.
No. Eitan? Yeah.
I just want to say, I'll speak for myself. I'd like to hear that point of view. It's hard to hear it if we don't know what it is. So, if you there's a lot in your comments. We're all in this task force. We have different point of views from one another and are trying to learn what we can. And if you have a public comment that disagrees with our work, instead of focusing on our motives or something like that, just say what the comments are. I'd like to be very open-minded to hear them.
Well, can I respond very briefly? I know you want very briefly. I think part of the trouble is that the atmosphere right now is poisonous. And there's people on both sides of these issues that are just much too prone to ad hominem attacks. And I'm kind of used to it, as I say in my comment, because I've been through it, many times in my career. But it just doesn't seem worth triggering more of that, can I say in a public meeting, bullshit. So it just doesn't seem worth it. It's too bad. I attribute a lot of this to the reaction to Trumpism, and people just don't listen to each other anymore.
I just say it's unfortunate. I think you heard us today literally lament the fact that we didn't hear more criticism at our pub. I don't think you heard a group that was patting itself on the back for all the great feedback we had. We talked extensively about wanting more critical feedback over the course of the 6 public hearings that we've held, and shared the information about those public hearings widely. Certainly, the members of the police department who've been engaged in this work were aware of those public hearings. I think
when I said that, I agreed with that comment, and that's what triggered me thinking about it. How little helpful dialogue is going on because people are just so vitriolic.
Right. Yeah. And okay. I'm gonna take that into account. I would love, if there's any feedback that you or other members of the public have about how we can bring more people to the table to share. I want everybody to read this, and they may disagree with the recommendations that are in the report, and that's fine. That's how policy gets figured out. We put forward recommendations, and the people debate them, and those with votes get to vote on what policies we move forward. You know that as good as anybody. I think I don't know, the door is open. I guess my question is, how can we open it wider? I don't know the answer to that, but the door seems pretty wide open to me. But anyway, if you have any recommendations on that now or in the future, we'd love to hear them. Yeah.
If I could give an answer to that question, I'd be even smarter than my father, who was very, very smart.
Right. We'll try. Well, I am hoping for, we've got 5 select board members, one of them, 4 other select board members that I hope are going to, having read the report, ours and the report of the reform committee, are going to have really thoughtful questions about the work in the report. I'm hoping that many people show up to the public hearing. Could be our biggest public hearing ever. If folks are interested and engaged in this work, I hope they are, and that we have an opportunity to hear all perspectives on this. I really do. Frankly, I was hoping we'd hear more perspectives on this, before we got to the select board. I'm not going to fool myself into believing that because we had overwhelmingly positive reactions from members of the public, that there are no negative reactions to this work. I think there will be, and we welcome it. So yeah. Anyway, but thanks for that, Marty. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Welcome.
Good. We've got a little bit of time. If there's anyone else that has a question for us, or this is all in the vein of trying to improve our final product, and to prepare us for questions that are bound to come up in the future. So if there are any right now, I'd love to hear them. I suppose you can indicate that by just raising your hand for the attendees, that raise hand feature. You're welcome to.
I just want to reiterate, I think it's very hard for us to confront disagreement if people aren't willing to put it in writing or make a cogent statement about what the disagreement is. I mean, at what time in the past was this conversation had in this way that provides opportunities for people who have different perspectives on this? Like, what was the previous era that Mr. Rosenthal indicated in which we were having a really kind of kind and thoughtful public debate on this? This is the time we're having it. And if someone has something to say, they should say it and put it in writing or say it in a public statement. And the idea that this is just something that they don't want, no one wants to get into an argument because of vitriol, that's not why we're here. We're here to get something done. And I think that if people disagree, they should stand by it and make a statement.
Thanks, Eitan. Okay. Anything else for new business from any members of the task force?
I wanted to mention, I reached out yesterday to Cahoots, to Tim Black. I haven't heard back yet, just asking him if there was any kind of ballpark estimate he could give us financially, that we could put in our report about what it might cost from his perspective to create such a team here. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful to include. Yeah. Great. And I know we had some estimates before, but some of those were for much larger communities than ours.
Right. That's what I said, for our size community, if we were doing this on our own without partnering with a adjoining town or something, what would this cost? So I'll wait. I'll let you know.
Great, thank you. John, I see you have your hand up. How about we promote John and hear from him? This is Select Board Member John Van Square.
How's my audio?
Sounds good.
Good. And thank you to everyone. As you folks know, I've been listening in on a lot of the work of this task force, and the work you've done it is indeed impressive. And the sincerity with which you approached all of this is something that I think is admirable and should be duplicated as often as possible in Brookline. I do want to say, though, on this question of the openness of the task force to critiques, just think back to what happened when a bunch of folks supporting the walk and talk program showed up at a hearing on the walk and talk program, and think back to the reaction of task force members when that happened. I seem to recall people were outraged that that had been solicited and had in fact resulted at one of your meetings that people actually came out to support a program, which ultimately your task force has recommended be phased out. And in fact, I even recall Etan saying that he thought that the police officer should be investigated who had asked supporters of the program to come to the hearing. And I'm sorry to say, it's that kind of response to critiques that causes people to just clam up. And I think a lot of people have clammed up. And you've been very aware of that in your comments today. Hopefully, going forward, people will come forward more readily. But I think they have to get a better response than the sense of outrage among task force members that greeted the support for the walk and talk program when you had a hearing on it. So I'll just leave it at that.
I do want to clarify, John, just that was a public meeting, not a public hearing, and there's a distinction between the two. And I think we talked about the issue with the officer there, but anyway, is that something, Bonnie, that you wanted to respond to, or?
Yes, I very, very briefly, that's correct. It was not a public hearing. That was why people were not allowed to speak. It was an opportunity for the subcommittee to ask questions of the walk and talk officers. It was not an opportunity. It was not a time to hear from the public. We needed to get facts from the officers, and that's what happened. And the police officers were the ones that had invited the people to come to support them incorrectly, because that was not the context of the meeting.
I'd also say just two other quick things, which is I was upset about what I heard at the task force about that situation, not because there was criticism, but because an officer on the police force was alleged here anyway to misrepresent the work of the task force, said that we were trying to defund the police or something along those lines. And I think there's a real distinction between that kind of behavior and public information. I also think there's a distinction between the role of police or any kind of employee of the town and the community that the police officers work for. We're here trying to make decisions as members of the community who the police work for, and soliciting their feedback is important, but it's different from hearing from members of the community who are voters and residents of this town.
Chi-Chi?
Did Mike have his
hand
up?
Mike, I thought you had your hand up.
I think Eitan just made a very important point, John, that it was disturbing that as we understood it at the time, officers were incorrectly stating, were incorrectly characterizing the motivation of the people on the subcommittee, and they used that to encourage people to come and provide support to them. It's one thing to try and get people who know your work to come and speak on your behalf. It's another thing to give them information that's just not true. And
the untrue information was?
I'm sorry?
What was the untrue information?
The untrue information was that there was an effort on the sort of a blind effort on the part of the subcommittee to, quote, defund the police.
And I seem to recall it was that they would get rid of the walk and talk program. And what is the final recommendation?
Well, the final recommendation comes out of the work that the subcommittee did looking at the walk and talk program. It was not a preconceived notion. It may have been something that some of the members of the subcommittee thought, well, this is something we really need to look at, and indeed that's why we did look at it. But it was very carefully looked at. The purpose of the survey was to help with that. Whatever conclusions the sub, I find myself in a very unusual position here, John. I'm probably the most politically conservative member of this group, and I was convinced by that information, by what we pulled together, that this is a program that has run its course. It's no longer working. I think, I don't know if you heard the comment that was made at the public hearing that we had the other night, on Wednesday night, from Jeff Benson, but his comment was that something that was initially well-intentioned had become a barrier. That's our conclusion, and it's not a conclusion that we came to originally. That is, we didn't arrive with that conclusion. We came to that conclusion after doing the work.
Well, I won't get into back and forth on that. I think the overall defensiveness to what I just said is kind of proving the point. If a whole bunch of folks show up at one of your meetings to support something that you are studying and want to give a balanced, deliver a balanced report on, is it really your position as a committee that you don't want to hear from them because it was a meeting, not a hearing? I can think of very few meetings of the task force at which there were that many people who might have offered an opinion contrary to the inclinations of people on the task force. And in retrospect, you're still defending not hearing from them because it was a meeting, not a hearing, and defending, your attitude towards the officer who got them there, as being someone who himself had acted improperly because he brought supporters of a program to a meeting at which the program was being examined. That just doesn't send a message of we're open to hearing from people who disagree with us. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. And I've said enough. I don't want to belabor the point.
No, I appreciate it, John. I don't know that maybe you can watch this. I don't know that you're listening to what Mike just said, but I think anyway. The other thing to understand about that particular meeting that you're referencing is that we have limited time to actually hear from the officers themselves, and that was the time that was set aside to meet with the officers. There was not time set aside, and not ample time to. And by the way, you can go back and watch it. Frankly, I wish that conversation with the officers would have been able to extend even further. And there certainly would have been no way to get the information that was gleaned and also hear from members of the public in that particular meeting. There had been other public hearings, including the one for the walk and talk program, and then yet another larger public hearing. And there's another one to come. And so people certainly have opportunity to share their thoughts. And also we've always encouraged people to email their thoughts to the task force as well. So I get your position on this. I think it's a slightly unfair characterization, but But that is, you're welcome, of course, to make that characterization based on your own perspective of the work that you've seen. So, but thanks for letting us know about that. And yeah.
Can I just add that we did repeatedly during that interview, which we had set aside as, we had a number of interview questions and we knew we had a very limited period of time. We did repeatedly tell people in the public, both verbally during the hearing when people were trying to speak, as well as in the chat box, that we wanted to hear from people, but that this was not we couldn't do it at this point because we wanted to hear from the officers, that this was our one opportunity to interview the officers of the program, and that we welcomed the feedback. We just couldn't do it at that time because this was an interview and not a public hearing. But we repeatedly welcomed people to provide feedback to us.
Does anyone want to comment on the fact that members of the task force openly called for an investigation of the officer who brought the people to the meeting at the following meeting, and then at the meeting after that demanded answers as to how the investigation of the officer was proceeding and wanted to know why they hadn't gotten a report back from the police chief on their call for an investigation of the officer? That just isn't consistent with, oh, and by the way, everybody, welcome your comments, even if you disagree with us. I'm sorry, I am belaboring the point, but it's because I feel like you folks aren't hearing me.
No. Go ahead, Eitan.
I mean, look, I would just say, I
Just
can totally
super
speak for
quickly,
myself.
Eitan. Chi-Chi's had her hand up. Super quickly, Eitan.
Oh, no,
sorry.
no.
Chi-Chi's
I mean,
had her hand up for a while.
Eitan can respond, but I mean, for himself, but, to respond to that, I think it was because of the abuse of a position. But what I wanted to say is that just because we've asked for feedback doesn't mean we can't disagree with the feedback. But Eitan, why don't you go, and then I'll elaborate on that.
All right. And then we'll start, we've got about 10 minutes left in our time. And so we'll start to work toward conclusion here. Go ahead, Eitan.
I mean, look, I'm only speaking for myself, but, and I say this just as an individual citizen and member of this task force, but in any other domain, if I work on election law, voting rights and things like that. If I knew that there was a election clerk who was mobilizing the public with a lie, saying the elected leaders or appointed officers of some committee are trying to, defund our election system or cause fraud, I don't take that as a public comment. I take that as an employee who is abusing their position. And so I take myself to be just one out of many citizens who employ that person and seek accountability when an employee of this town lies. If that's what the allegation was, that there was an allegation that this person was saying that that the task force sought to defund the police. I don't think any person in a position of employment in the town should be permitted to do that with the town public email address. And that's sort of the allegation that was happening. So that's what I want to investigate. And I would feel the same way, again, if an election clerk, which is my area of expertise, engaged in that behavior, or any other public employee.
Thanks, Chi-Chi.
So I just want to say the broader point, the fact that we're asking for folks who are skeptical of our work to come forward and engage with us doesn't mean we can't engage back. I mean, that's what a dialogue is about. And I'm frankly a little bit tired of the right's constant accusation of cancel culture. It feels a little bit in bad faith, like the term fake news, that, just because we've said we don't agree with you doesn't mean we're trying to cancel you. Our task force chair, select board member Fernandez, he got some really nasty feedback from the police that triggered all sorts of hate threats, but he's still speaking out. All of us are leaving ourselves open to that kind of pushback, but we're still speaking out. Just because you're subject to criticism, as long as it is respectful and it's engaged on the issues is not canceling. And so yes, we are asking for feedback, but if we say we don't agree with you and here's our evidence that we think we're right, it isn't about canceling.
Thanks, Chi. Alexander?
I wanted to comment. I had a bunch of comments that have been covered by my fellow members of the task force here. One thing I wanted to comment on, Mr. Van Skyok, I know you're a select board member, was the characterization of our response here as defensive, or as this being about defensiveness. I think one of the things that really drives political polarization is perceiving a correction on the facts as being defensive, offensive, or aggressive. I think what you're hearing here is a lot of folks who were there and who were in these meetings correcting you correcting the characterization that we're hearing here of what happened. I think we need to have a really rigorous relationship to the facts and to the truth. And if we're afraid to speak about that, then I think we've got much bigger problems.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, John. I think this group should be prepared, one of my concerns is that I really want to have a conversation with the public on the merits of the recommendations that are before them, there may be others that want to have a different dialogue, and to make this I think to try to undermine the work of this task force by talking about things like openness and stuff like that. I think there's plenty of evidence to refute that, of course, but I certainly will encourage people to not be over there talking about that, but to rather be here talking about this, and to focus on what direction we as a community, as Brookline, want to move in going forward. And what I would encourage board members and others to do, select board members and others to do, is to pull back a little bit. And if we're gonna be in public hearings arguing about what happened at a public hearing 2 months ago, that's not a really fruitful discussion for our community, quite frankly. And folks can just go back and watch the tape. But in any case, the right approach, I think, is to say, look, take this report and step back a little bit and say, what direction is this group recommending that we go in? Not tomorrow, right? Although there are some tomorrow things that we need to do in order to get there, but where is the place this group thinks we should be in the next 1, 3, 5, and further years out? And is that the direction that I want to vote that we go, or not? And not to, us arguing about an individual meeting or whatever it is, that certainly ain't gonna get us anywhere, but backwards. And what we're trying to do is move forward. Now, if board members take a look at that and they sit back and they say, you know what? No, I don't think so. I think that we just need to make some improvements to our existing police department, and maybe something here or there, and that's the direction we want to go. Okay, there'll be other bodies that'll weigh in separately, but that is what I hope that people will do, is say, understanding that more work needs to be done, understanding that there are some logistics that need to be figured out. Is this the right and better direction for our community than where we've been going? I think there's ample evidence in the report to indicate that the answer is yes. I think we've got 10 other members of our community who did not all come here to abolish or defund or all those other things that people say, but who also live in our community, and I've said before, also want to be safe as much as anybody else, and some of us that have even graver concerns of safety than others in our community, and want to make sure that that's provided for us and our families, and that we think there's a better way forward, and we've done the work to show that there can be, and here's what it might look like. That's essentially what we're asking for from people in the community. Do we want to shift and go in this direction? And if we do, then yes, then we'll figure out some of the logistics and more details and things like that. But that's the conversation we need to have, not about this, frankly. It's small ball. I think it's below the station, frankly, of those of us who are on the board, to think so small. I'd encourage us to step back and think about the bigger picture, and have a really substantive discussion about that. I think that's going to get us to to a better place, regardless of the result. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. We are reaching 10 o'clock. As I said, we're doing some work over the weekend, get some information to you and to members of the public, and we'll have a final report that we adopt a week from today, which is really exciting. And then make that presentation to the board. Hang in there, y'all. You're doing great work. I'm appreciative and proud of each and every one of you. Thanks to our staff who continue to be there with us every step of the way. Mel Kleckner couldn't be here today, the town administrator, but he'll be right back with us. He's just off today. And so just, thank you to everybody that's keeping us going, to Big for sharing this, and to Devin for all your great work. I'll keep thanking you every chance I can get. All right, y'all. We'll see you again soon. Take care.